Today I have the great privilege of speaking with Dr. Yuri Maltsev. Having grown up and spent his early professional career in the socialist economy of the Soviet Union, Dr. Maltsev has both a fascinating personal story and deep insights regarding the perils of socialism. Excerpts from this interview will be featured in our forthcoming short video, Boris Goes Shopping. Dr. Maltsev, welcome. First off, I just wanted to get some background from you. Tell me about where you grew up, what life was like there, and then how did you get involved in economics?
All right, yes. I was born in a place called Kazan, which is capital of Tatar Republic. It's about 300 miles east of Moscow. The city of Kazan was founded by Tatars and Mongols by Genghis Khan, and that's where from they ruled Russia. I was born in a professional family. All my family were medical people, and I graduated from high school and went to the university there, and then moved to Moscow and attended Moscow State University. And in the university, I was infected by the free market economics because a friend of mine gave me a forbidden book by Friedrich August von Hayek, great Austrian economist, Road to Serfdom. I was given this book just for one night, and it was amazing because I had a lot of thoughts on this, but it was like developing the film because Hayek, he has absolutely iron logic. He has a fantastic, I would say, gift of persuasion of people. And so next morning I went to the dean of my college in Moscow University and changed my major from history to history of economic thought and economic history, so that I could already legally read Hayek and von Mises and other great economists. In Soviet Union, if you are not authorized to read, say, Hayek or von Mises or whomever else that the government doesn't want you to read, you could get 7 years of jail.
Wow.
And if you are passing a book like Road to Serfdom around, you could get 12 years for dissemination of anti-Soviet slander, as they would put it.
So at that point, did you want to teach economics?
Yes, all my life I would combine teaching with research and sometimes working even for government. I worked for the late government of President Gorbachev as one of economic advisors. I wasn't the advisor, I wouldn't take the blame for, for ruining 11 time zones, but I was one of advisors and nobody listened to it, and look what happened.
About what year was that when you were in university and exposed to free market ideas?
Well, I went to university from 1968 to 1973. So the book was given to me in 1972. But I would say that I never was infected with the bacilli of communism before, because my grandfather was murdered by Stalin in 1939. And so my father's life was screwed up because of that. And in our family, we knew what's happening. We didn't have any kind of illusions of what kind of society we live in.
Now, when did you first come to the United States?
Well, I defected from Soviet Union in 1989. I went on a business trip to Finland and then missed my train and ended up in the Kennedy Airport in New York. So that was because I lost hope in perestroika, which was very half-hearted, ill-devised program, which was also misimplemented and boycotted by bureaucrats.
How much of a personal risk or personal danger were you in defecting at that time?
Well, if I would be caught in the process, I would automatically get 12 years of hard labor in Eastern Siberia, which the good news would be that nobody would serve 12 years. They would die in 3 or 4.
Wow.
However, I was not definitely looking for that kind of career change.
Now, the purpose of the Economics on Location video we're doing is to compare and contrast the socialist, centrally planned economy with the market, spontaneous order, entrepreneurial type economy. And I would just like you to reflect on, when you first arrived in the US, what did you notice? What were the economic differences that struck you from having lived your whole life in the Soviet system?
Amazingly enough, that was not even economic differences, that were people. People smiling, saying hi, That was completely unusual. It was such a drastic change from Soviet Union. If you will look at any kind of documentary showing you footage of Soviet life, you would see people pretty grim-faced. Nobody would smile. You would never hear laughter in the public places. So that was really a very gray, grim society. Then besides that, definitely material wealth is overwhelming. I remember back in Soviet Union, I worked in a very high position in Soviet government, and for me to buy a VCR, it would take maybe about 5 years of savings. In the United States, when I got my first job at the United States Institute of Peace, I bought my VCR with 1 day savings. One day wages were enough to buy VCR, and at that time VCR was $265, I remember. Today, to buy a DVD player would take me maybe an hour of my time.
Tell me more, if you would, about shopping, because the setting for Yeltsin's story is the grocery store. And when he came, he was just stunned at the amount of food available, how clean it was, how bright it was, and so on. Did you have a similar experience?
Oh, definitely, yes. I lived in Washington, D.C., and Safeway was just kind of my the most favorite place. I would just walk there. Also in Washington in the summer, it's very hot. And Safeway is so well ventilated and air conditioned, and just to see all these varieties was amazing, even for a person who had way more access to good things in the Soviet Union than most others.
What were stores like in the Soviet Union from your own experience?
In the Soviet Union, they had two types of stores. One for the masses, and that would be nothing then. And then the other stores, which would be so-called closed stores, that would be for bureaucracy, for government and party officials. And because I worked for the government, I had an access to this special store, and I would go there every Tuesday. Tuesday was my day, so I could go and buy things. However, that store wouldn't resemble anything close to the regular United States supermarket. The stores for the masses were just empty shelves. Some of them were pretty clean because there was absolutely nothing.
So it is fair to say that the kind of shopping and grocery store that even people like Boris Yeltsin had access to was just empty and bland compared to just the basic store in the United States.
Exactly. I had the dubious pleasure of working with Mr. Yeltsin for half a year together, and he used to say that to get rid of communism, you need to walk the whole population of the Soviet Union through a department store or grocery store in the West.
So this knowledge was kind of floating around, but to see it in person was something else.
That's right, yes. Mr. Yeltsin, at that time, he was pretty humorous and nice person. Later, he developed this bad habit of liking certain beverage too much.
I see.
But before that, he was, yes, he would make some nice quips all of the time.
So you're an economist and you've studied these things for a long time. Can you give a very brief commentary on what was the economic problem in the Soviet Union?
Well, the economic problem on the Soviet Union was socialism. Socialism is a system, as von Mises, the great Austrian economist, used to say, it's not an economic system. It's a very simple system of management. And being so, there is no incentives to do anything. So to make people to do what they want, the socialist leaders would resort to murder, would resort to coercion, to crude force. Rudy Rummel, great American demographer from University of Hawaii, he came up with 200 million people murdered by their socialist masters during the course of the 20th century. If the government cannot give you anything because they don't have anything, so the only way to make you work is to point a gun at you. And that's what happened. In dreadful Gulag, Stalin murdered about 50, 60 million people. Nobody even knows. The estimates ranging from 40 to 60 million. And I don't even care which number is that, because both numbers are completely horrific for an ordinary human to understand. Stalin himself used to say, death of one is a tragedy, death of a million just statistics. Mm-hmm. So that's what it was. And then Gorbachev, when he came to power, he had an idea that socialism was perverted by Stalin, that we should strive for some kind of a human type of socialism, socialism with a human face, he called it. And at that time we had a pretty good joke in Moscow, which explains what happened. Because what Gorbachev did, he removed the fear out of the system, which was glued together only by fear. And the joke is that CIA didn't know what's happening during Perestroika, and they sent their best agent to Moscow. And this agent is walking from one store to another. He goes to a butcher shop and writes in his little notebook, "No meat." He goes to a bakery and writes there, "No bread." He goes to the shoe store and writes in his little notebook, "No shoes." And there is a KGB guy following him, and he looks over his shoulder, and he said, 5 years ago, you would be shot for doing that. And he says, and he writes there, "No bullets." And that's when people realize that there are no bullets, then everybody stopped working.
Now, the Soviet Union had a lot of natural resources, a lot of able people, a lot of knowledge. What accounts in the direct economic sense for no food on the shelves?
Yeah, people not working. Because it's very difficult to make people to work for somebody else for nothing. So that's the most important thing. I testified before the Agricultural Committee of the United States Congress on this topic, and there was a gentleman from the U.S. Department of Agriculture saying that, well, they don't know how to do things. We will send them experts from the United States, and they will teach them how to harvest well, how to keep what they harvested, how to store it, how to distribute it. And then I was asked to make a comment, and my comment was that with any amount of experts, you never can make people work for somebody else for free. And that was the most important. The absence of economic calculation, absence of any economic incentives, absence of the price system. There is no magic of the price system. It was central planning. How you in the world would plan shoes, for example, for the people? How would you know what are the sizes that they need? What are the colors they would prefer? Whether their feet are wide or narrow or whatever else. It's just a mind-boggling exercise in futility.
And that brings us, of course, to the market system and entrepreneurship and the incentives that we get from prices and profit. Of course, that doesn't work perfectly in the US, but it works pretty well. And the contrast is stark between the socialist economy and what we might call the imperfect market economy in the US. Talk about that from your perspective, from transitioning from the one to the other.
Yes, I have a pretty kind of, I would say, simple and clear explanation for that. The more socialism you have, the less goods on the shelves, the less freedom people have. Because what is freedom? Freedom is choice. And the more choices you have, the more freedom you have. In the United States, unfortunately, many people do not realize that, and they are giving their freedom, they are giving their choices. They think that the big government can be helpful. However, the same Hayek, he I would say, proved that central planning, central decision making would not work because you cannot centralize knowledge. You cannot centralize information. I even don't know what I'll do after this interview. So how would a planner in Washington, D.C. or somewhere else would know what do I need, what do I want? So that's the major issue. Von Mises, in 1918, he wrote a short essay, The Economic Calculation in the Socialist Commonwealth. He was the first economist in the West to realize that socialism is a non-working system. It's a system which can survive only by mass murder. And if you will look at every socialist country in the world, from Cuba to North Korea, from China to Soviet Union, from, at that time, communist Poland to communist Bulgaria, all of them were based on coercion, on murder, on forced labor.
Is there anything else that we should know in thinking about the contrast in the economic system?
What I would like maybe to add a little bit, It's pretty kind of maybe radical, but that's what I believe in. I think that socialism is reincarnation of slavery in its public form. That under socialism, what happens that not only means of production, not only all factories, land, plants, everything else is nationalized. People are nationalized. They became slaves of their own government. And then the government needs to feed them, needs to provide them to do things like that. And erroneously, people in the West, they look at that slavery and they see only things like free healthcare. If you look at slavery, in slavery also, it was free healthcare, free housing, free food, free everything. Mm-hmm. But who would like to live like that? And in Soviet Union, the conditions of life were appalling. Life expectancy was 57 for men and 66 for women. 36% of hospitals in today's Russia do not have running water or sewer system. So you can see how devastating was socialist experiment for the country, which could be the richest country in the world, with 11 time zones, with all natural resources. Mm-hmm.
Russia has transitioned to some extent to a market economy. Can you maybe give us a brief update on the progress made since that transition, since the collapse of the Soviet system?
Well, Ludwig von Mises, in his great opus, Human Action, he was writing about two types of socialism. There are two patterns. One is the Russian pattern, that would be Soviet socialism, where everything belonged to the state. Another one would be German pattern. German pattern would be central planning, but without public ownership of everything. So that German pattern that he was referring to was National Socialism, was Nazism. Nazism was another form of socialism, or socialism with kind of capitalist veneer, in a sense that was socialism where the private property rights were declared. They were not honored, but they were declared, meaning that you can have a title for your plant, for your factory, but the government would tell you when to open, when to close, whom to hire, whom to fire, what prices to charge, what prices to pay. So that was another form of socialism. Now Russia succeeded in moving from Soviet type of socialism to this German type, to German pattern. So I would say that Russia is emerging as a fascist state because it's a big government deciding everything for people. It's an authoritarian government. It's a government which is a menace not only to its own people, but to its neighbors and to us in the United States.
Has there been any improvement, though, in the sense that there is at least some level of market functioning, some food on the shelves now?
Of course, even because the German pattern, as bad as it is definitely less of socialization than in the Soviet pattern. And sure enough, today's Russians live much better, much better than they lived under Soviet socialism. Some of them, like 10 million last year alone, went for vacationing into other countries, which were unheard of. Many Russians today, they have access to World Wide Web. Many of them have cars. Their cars density in the Soviet Union was one car for 118 households. So today it is already one car for about 50 households. So they double the amount of cars per person. Today the other problem is that people do not have money to buy things, but there are things available already. However, Mr. Putin is doing everything to upset his people, I would say. Now he declared sanctions against the West, that Russia cannot buy foodstuffs in the West. And so today they created artificial shortage of food again. Well, because Russians endured so much under Soviet socialism, so that's why we don't see the riots, or we don't see much of opposition, because the regime is pretty much repressive.
Final question, Dr. Maltsev. What are the prospects for the expansion of free markets in Russia? And you mentioned that people are online. Are people learning about free markets and the open, entrepreneurial, competitive economic system? Is there a big movement for that right now?
Yes, there is a movement, definitely. There's a lot of free marketeers, libertarians, conservatives among Russian intelligentsia. However, definitely Mr. Putin doesn't like that, and so that's why these ideas are not as widespread as they could be if, for example, it would be somebody else without this KGB background that Mr. Putin has. Boris Nemtsov, a famous Russian politician, a former deputy prime minister who was murdered recently, and many accused Putin of assassinating Mr. Nemtsov. He was pretty free market. He was the governor of Nizhny Novgorod, that's the province in Russia, and he was very free market. He created a free economic zone there. So there are some people, but today is not a good time for free markets, definitely, because we see the consolidation of government power. At a certain point in 1990s, the country was ruled by people who are known as oligarchs. So that would be people who amassed a lot of wealth during a very murky kind of period of privatization. It was a period which Russians call spontaneous privatization. And spontaneous privatization, you can translate it to English as theft. So people were amassing whatever, and then if you're close to government, you can have a lot. And so most of these oligarchs, they were very much connected politically. Today, even oligarchs lost their power because Mr. Putin again recreated government monopoly, his own monopoly on power.
Well, we'll stop there. Thank you again, Dr. Maltsev, for your time. This is going to be a great contribution to the video we're doing about Yeltsin in the grocery store and comparing the market economy with socialism. Fantastic stuff, and this is going to be of great value to my students, and I greatly appreciate it.
Well, really enjoyed meeting you on the World Wide Web.
Yes.